As Russian troops withdraw from northern districts of Kyiv, Ukrainian forces are arriving to find death and destruction in their wake. The town of Bucha is the scene of what some here are describing as a massacre. Dozens of bodies lie on the road. Residents say the retreating Russians shot anyone they found.
These people were just walking, and they shot them without any reason. Bang! In the next neighborhood, Stekolka, it was even worse. They shot without asking any questions.
Bucha's town mayor says these are just some of several hundred civilians killed.
Corpses of executed people still line the Yabluska street in Bucha. Their hands are tied behind their backs with white civilian rags. They were shot in the back of their heads.
In an open trench, bodies appear to be partially burned. It's feared Russian troops may have also left explosives and landmines behind. In Irpin, another town north of the capital, a Red Cross team filled the devastation as they arrived to treat the survivors. Elsewhere, Ukrainian forces say they are retaking all of the towns and villages in the Kyiv region that had been under Russian control. But President Volodymyr Zelensky is warning Russia may be readying its forces to attack elsewhere.
Earlier, we spoke to our correspondent Nick Connolly in the region northeast of Kyiv, where Ukrainian forces say they've retaken territory from retreating Russian troops. Here's his assessment of the situation in Bucha.
Well, the issue with Bucha and Irpin and those areas is that journalists are not able to get in there yet. We expect to get in a few days' time, so we're not able to verify those pictures independently to see it with our own eyes. But definitely the situation there is desperate, and all these last weeks we've been hearing from people who were there in those towns, unable to get out. Lots of failed attempts to organise humanitarian corridors and temporary ceasefires to allow people to get out in safety, and sadly enough, lots of cases of people hurt or even losing their lives trying to get out. Those images obviously are shocking people across Ukraine who hadn't seen that kind of treatment of civilians documented with pictures in the recent weeks. So in a way, for Ukrainian civilians following this war from their homes, even if they're not being bombed on a daily basis, they are now seeing these images and are being confronted with the reality of the occupation and the cost to civilians.
Well, DW's Nick Connolly there reporting from Ukraine. Missiles have hit the port city of Odessa on Ukraine's southern coast. Up till now, the strategic city had been largely spared from Russian attacks, unlike the intense bombing that's devastated Mariupol. But now Ukrainians fear a new phase of the war has begun.
Bombs strike Ukraine's main port city of Odessa, turning the dawn sky orange, waking residents up to a new phase of Russia's war in Ukraine. An aid worker filmed the bombings on his phone.
I woke up approximately at 4 or 4:30 a.m. because our house was a bit shaking. Yeah, like this. And it was very big noise. Also this rocket attacks, and the sky was red, and the smoke also.
It was a big explosion, like as if an airplane crashed. I've never seen something like that. We need to close the sky because we don't want this again. As local people watched plumes of smoke loom over the city, the authorities there said Russia had hit critical infrastructure, but there were no reports of casualties. Russia's defense ministry said its ships and planes had bombed an oil processing plant and fuel depots near Odessa. It said the facilities supply fuel to Ukraine's troops in coastal towns further east. Odessa emergency crews have not yet had to deal with heavy Russian bombardment like the eastern port of Mariupol. But Ukraine's President Zelensky says that Russian troops are regrouping and preparing what he calls powerful strikes. And Odessa's residents are left wondering just how long they can stay here.
And for more, I'm joined now from Odessa by Lawrence Sheets. He's a former NPR Moscow bureau chief and head of consulting group Eurasian International Analytics. He has also covered the Soviet Union and Russia for over 3 decades. And he's now from Odessa, where he has been reporting on the military situation for the past 2 weeks. So very good to have you with us, Lawrence. Just tell us what happened last night, or rather early this morning over there.
About 4:30 a.m., we received, those of us in Odessa, text messages on our cell phones, warning of an imminent air raid, basically. There was a general warning. That was followed by air raid sirens, and then at 6 a.m. exactly, there were extremely loud explosions, which could only be missiles, and that has been confirmed by Ukrainian military sources. They landed about 1 kilometer from where I'm sitting, near the port in Odessa. There's still black smoke billowing into the sky, even though it's been 8.5 hours since, well, 8 hours since the missile struck. Odessa is not just Ukraine's biggest port. It's the last remaining port. 70% of imports and exports used to come through Odessa. Of course, it's been blocked off by the Russian naval forces for several weeks now. But Ukraine being a major supplier of world wheat supplies and other agricultural goods, and the conduit for imports, the importance can't be overstated.
Absolutely. So strategically, this is also playing a big role. We'll go into that in just a moment. But, I mean, what about the people there? We know that Odessa has so far been spared, mostly. How prepared were people there for this kind of attack?
I think they're extremely prepared. The fact that a couple of months went by and the shelling from Russian naval boats had been limited to shelling from boats from the sea, from the Black Sea, limited to the outskirts, hadn't caused that much significant damage. But this was in the heart of Odessa. On the streets, I can tell you, I just took a walk up to the market. Very few people out. I would say 1/5 of the usual level of traffic you would see on a regular day, whether it's shops or traffic or what have you. So the implications are, if nothing else, to terrorize the civilian population and to scare them.
You mentioned earlier about the importance of Odessa right now being the only port city the Ukraine has available. Do you think that Russia is actually trying to completely cut off Ukraine from having access to the sea?
Well, they were cut off to begin with from the sea. Let's make that very clear. They were cut off because the Russians have blockaded from the sea the Odessa port. So what we have are ships here in dry dock. The oil facilities and oil storage facilities, which are now on fire behind me, of course, are strategic, but it doesn't change the situation that Ukraine was already blockaded from the sea. The fact of the matter is that many people are talking about a possible land invasion from the sea, a marine invasion from the sea by Russian forces, and that's impossible. It's possible. I guess anything's possible because nothing has been predictable in this war. But this is a city of catacombs, of tunnels underneath through limestone. It's extremely well fortified, prepared, and I think people have been expecting this for the most part.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lawrence Sheets. They're obviously a man who is highly in demand because you've been reporting on the military situation for the past 2 weeks. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, ma'am.
And here's a quick look at some other stories related to the war we've been following for you. Russian gas is no longer flowing to Latvia, Estonia and Lithuania. The Baltic states have stopped imports. Lithuania's president has called on other EU countries to do the same. But Germany and other European countries are still buying Russian energy. Russia's gas industry has been excluded from EU sanctions. A Red Cross convoy is again trying to deliver aid and evacuate civilians from the besieged city of Mariupol. It had to abandon an attempt on Friday due to security concerns. An estimated 160,000 civilians are still trapped there without food or water. Earlier, we spoke to DW correspondent Rebecca Ritters in the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, and I asked her about the latest attempts to rescue civilians from Mariupol.
There's thought to be anywhere between 100,000 and 160,000 people still trapped in that besieged city, suffering bombardments for weeks now, horrific reports of no food, no water, no electricity, basically living in bunkers, watching relatives die of starvation and dehydration, just horrific scenes there. Now, there is reports that a convoy is trying once again today to make it inside that besieged city, as you just reported. They have not been able to get into the city for the last 3 days. It's been too dangerous. They've decided they had to turn back. This is a convoy that's supported by the International Red Cross. Some civilians, however, in some slightly good news, have made it out in the last days. There's about 3,000 civilians have made it out in their personal cars, just sort of trying to risk that treacherous journey outside of that city because they just want to escape the horrible scenes in there. But so many more deciding that it's too risky and it's probably hedging their bets, trying to stay inside the city. At least 5,000 people are reported to have died in that bombardment in recent weeks. And just today we heard that a Lithuanian filmmaker has also been reported to have been killed by Russian forces there in that city.
Well, a lot of those refugees, of course, are headed to where you are, to Lviv in western Ukraine. It's become a refuge for hundreds of thousands of refugees already. Are you hearing that people may now be planning to return, at least to those areas that have been retaken by the Ukrainian forces?
That's right. Lviv is relatively safe compared to eastern parts of the country, and so many of the refugees and internally displaced people have been passing through here. Just yesterday, a train with people from Mariupol arrived here in Lviv, about 300 or so, and they've been going to centres here in the city. There are reports that people do want to now return, even people that have been abroad, in Poland and other parts of Europe. There are reports of thousands of people now actually returning back into Ukraine and trying to go to areas that are deemed safe, or at least relatively safe. But there are Ukrainian authorities saying that those parts that have been recently retaken are still incredibly unsafe. You know, we're hearing reports of bombs being put into dead bodies that are lying in the streets and in houses there by the retreating Russian soldiers, so that these areas are still not safe for civilians to return to.
All right, Rebecca Ritters, they're reporting for us from Lviv in western Ukraine. Thank you, Rebecca. At the start of the war, Russian troops took control of the area around the highly contaminated Chernobyl nuclear plant. After weeks of occupation, some may have been exposed to radiation. Chernobyl is the site of the world's worst nuclear accident and remains a forbidden zone.
Russian soldiers at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They took over the building on February the 24th, right at the start of Russia's invasion. Did the troops really know much about the place their government had sent them? Apparently, the young soldiers were clueless about the 1986 nuclear disaster, despite large numbers of deaths by radiation and heavy contamination. That's Vadim Pobedim's view. He's Ukraine's chief engineer at Chernobyl, and despite the risk of speaking to us, he agrees to an interview. He says his co-workers, who were held by Russian troops for almost 4 weeks, told him that the Russian soldiers might have mistaken the protective shell around the failed reactor for an assembly hall and wore no protective clothing. They thought the respirators were there to protect them from COVID and didn't understand that you had to put them on to prevent inhaling radioactive dust. A Ukrainian TV station reports that in the so-called Red Forest near the plant, which is highly contaminated, Russian soldiers are reported to have dug trenches and consequently will have received a considerably larger dose of radiation. Physicist Sebastian Flugbeil, who has been to Chernobyl several times, considers their actions very dangerous. You might be able to walk through it, even if you're not allowed to, without dropping dead immediately. But if you're digging in this area, you must realize you're going to stir up some really highly radioactive particles. The director of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, plans to visit Chernobyl soon.
We heard about the possibility of some personnel being contaminated, but we don't have any confirmation about that.
Vadim Pobedim, however, says his co-workers say that a few days ago 3 buses picked up Russian soldiers from Chernobyl during the night. Some were vomiting. They had nosebleeds. They were in bad shape. They had clear signs of radiation sickness. Various Ukrainian media are showing pictures of the buses, which have, in the meantime, made it to Gomel in Belarus. The soldiers are being examined at an established radiation institute. British newspaper The Telegraph is reporting that 1 soldier has already died following his deployment in Chernobyl.